So we do have audio, which means the people watching online can watch us and not send little messages that says can't hear you or could you please communicate what you're saying in sign language because we can't read lips here. Anyway, well, welcome everybody. It is the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and I think it was, let's see, I happened to stumble over one or two verses that I thought were very appropriate for the time. Have to do with uh, Psalms, Psalm 95. They're both Psalms. Let us come before Him with thanksgiving, and then turn over to Psalm 100, verses 4 and 5. Enter into His gates with thanksgiving. I thought, hey, Thanksgiving, that's a good word. Maybe we should use that. Better to do it now than a couple of weeks later. But anyway, the Psalms, not the focus of our study this morning. We are continuing in our study of Mark. We're actually kind of sort of midway through Mark right now because we're in chapter 8. We're in the latter part of chapter 8. And we've been through a couple of little episodes of blindness, the issue of blindness, physical and spiritual. And, there was kind of a discussion. I would call it an embarrassing discussion only on the part of the disciples, but um, Jesus was trying to get them across the goalpost, a couple of spiritual insights. And they were having trouble getting there. I mean, even if Jesus were to pick them up, literally, and spiritually and carry them over, they still weren't getting it in terms of beware of the sinful behavior and the acts and the thoughts of your religious leaders, because or those who pose as God's religious leaders, because they really either don't know what they're talking about or they actually are uh, doing Satan's work unwittingly or otherwise. But anyway, that kind of got to a point where it's obvious that for a lot of us, we have, our spiritual insight grows very gradually. It's very rare that we get those flashes of insight, you know. And it spiritual growth, spiritual sight comes in spurts and stages, in unexpected moments. And maybe that's why we had this little episode that where we left off last week, where Jesus heals this blind man. And as we know, Jesus has the capacity to heal like long distance. He does a lot of physical acts sometimes. He lays his hands on people, takes them by the hand. Sometimes he spits on them or uses his spit or whatever. Uh, Here we have this very unusual episode. This is the only recorded miracle or healing of its type where the healing comes in stages. You know, Jesus begins his work, steps back, says, "What do you see?" And the man says, "Well, I do see people, but they look like trees walking around." So the sight's partially restored, but not totally. So Jesus basically continues, and then in the second stage, the sight is completely restored, which sort of this. If you're wondering why he does it this way, there's no explanation. There's no clear explanation or answer. But one possibility may be that Jesus is demonstrating through this particular miracle, coming as it does after this somewhat frustrating discussion with his disciples, that, you know, I'm going to demonstrate physically what it's like to gain sight spiritually, to come out of your spiritual blindness. More often than not, it's going to come in these little stages, in increments, sometimes maybe leaps and bounds, but it's very rare for a person just to get everything totally. all at once, 100%. You know, it maybe there have been those kind of persons. I know it hasn't happened to me. You know, I continue to stumble over these little aha moments even today. And I suspect there are several other folks who kind of say, "Yep, that's been my experience too," which I guess is why we need to continue in Bible study and prayer and those things that help us get us closer to Christ. Anyway, let's pick up now. We're as I said, we're in chapter 8 of Mark. Let's pick up around verse 27. We've been talking about spiritual blindness and insight. We're about to see a little episode of insight, a major news flash, actually. So, picking up on verse 27, Mark continues, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Basically, they're still somewhere kind of on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. They're still moving around in that region. And so while they're going around, on the way, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" What are people saying? Now, it's not like Jesus wouldn't know, but that's not the purpose of the question. I'm kind of curious. What do people really think about me? And it's not really the purpose of the question. The purpose of the question is to get the discussion going to lead to an even greater question. And so the disciples answer, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." All reasonable answers. John the Baptist was pretty high profile, and especially with the message he was teaching about the coming Messiah. And then Elijah is one of the, not just any biblical character or any Jewish major figure. He is one of the superstars. I mean, everybody was, if people talked about, mentioned Elijah almost in hushed tones because of the power of the man, the power of what he was able to do. Well, maybe he's Elijah come back. He's a miracle worker. And then the third category, one of the prophets, any number of prophets that were highly regarded. And of course, we've run across several of them in the Old Testament. So Jesus is being compared to a preacher, a teacher, and a miracle worker. That's not all bad. Hey, Jesus, you got pretty good street cred here. And whenever you talk, people take you seriously. At least some people take you seriously. Hey, not doing too badly here. But that's not the purpose of the discussion here for Jesus. He turns the question to them, to the disciples, verse 29. "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And then Peter answered. And of course, we always like to make fun of Peter because he's always out there. He's there with a hot take, even if he's not. It doesn't turn out as insightful as it might have been. But here, he nails it. Peter answered, "You are the Messiah. You are the Christ. You are the Son of God." He gets it. And Mark leaves out this little detail, but if you go over to Matthew chapter 16, verse 17, Matthew has this little note where Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Peter, because the Father has revealed this to you." Peter, you are so blessed because only God the Father, only my Father could have revealed this to you. This is why you're able to say this. You have this insightful flash direct from God, the Father. You are so blessed. But Jesus also tells them something else. Verse 30, Jesus warned them. He strictly charged them not to tell anyone about it. Hey, guys, this is being revealed to you because you are my close circle, and you want to know and you need to know. but this is for your information only. Don't go spreading it around. There were valid reasons for not spreading it around because there could be unintended consequences from people who wanted to take advantage of it. Especially if you invoke the word Messiah. By this point in time, faithful Jews who studied about the Messiah, who talked about the Messiah, who were awaiting the Messiah, had a very clear vision of who the Messiah would be. If you want any kind of a analysis or a comparison to today, think about Superman. Hey, I got to tell you about my cousin Ralph. My cousin, well, we're of a certain age. If you're a certain age, you remember this TV series called The Adventures of Superman. And, it was, when you were a little kid watching that, this was, this guy could do anything. And he looked, he looked so muscular. He looked so powerful in his Superman suit. They'd have these little episodes where they would they would fire guns at him and the bullets would bounce off his chest. And there were other episodes where he would just be I think every episode showed him just flying through the air. Look up in the sky, in the air, it's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Superman, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, faster than the speeding train, yada 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 yada. I tell you what, I didn't do it, fortunately, but there were several kids who would watch Superman and said, that's me. And they would grab a bath towel, tie it around their neck. Sometimes some of them would go so far as to get an extra pair of underwear, and hey, they had their Superman suit, and they would go around faster than a speeding bullet. If the bullet was a 19-year-old dog named Bullet, yeah. They'd climb up on, maybe they'd climb up on a tall area. Some would even go up on the roof of the house. Hey, I'm gonna jump off and fly. Well, that lasted for about a nanosecond, and then gravity would take over and down they went. And something would break more often than not, whatever they landed on. Some were unfortunate enough where they'd, break their wrist, break a leg or whatever. But, people were crazy about Superman. Well, my cousin Ralph loved the show. And he subscribes to this TV service where you can download and save entire TV series. And so he did. And he had his grandchildren over a couple of weeks ago. And he was, the plan was to binge watch every episode of Superman, or as many episodes as they could in a single afternoon. Well, I don't think they even completed one episode because the kids would start watching. They'd go, what is this? This is so boring, Grandpa. Yes, and I think he shut it off maybe not quite toward the ending of the first episode, because technology has changed. You can do so many spectacular things in the movies now. And these episodes, by comparison, look quite primitive. But hey, Superman captured people's imagination back in the day. And that's what people in first century Judea imagined the Messiah to be. They loved all the verses that talked about the Messiah coming with force. Hey, he's going to, his foot is going to touch the Mount of Olives and split it in two. Man, and you know what? When he comes up and meets all those Romans, those oppressive Romans that we hate, man, he's gonna open up a can of you know what and beat everybody up. We won't have to worry about those darned old Roman soldiers and that oppressive government because he will get rid of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right on, Messiah. We're waiting for you. Unfortunately, some of them, probably a lot of these Messiah hopefuls, forgot or never read the passage in Isaiah about the suffering servant. It's Isaiah chapter 53. I mentioned that because back in the day, they did not have chapters or verses. You just had to know where it was. Read Isaiah 53, and that is a description of the Messiah, and that is exactly a representation of the life of Jesus. And it had nothing to do with beating up people and overpowering people and kicking them out and so forth. But that's what people were looking for. But there was a little bit of a learning curve that Jesus needed to teach his disciples. As we see here, verse 31, Jesus then began to teach them that the Son of Man was going to undergo 4 things. The Son of Man must suffer many things, number 1. Number 2, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. That is, he would be roundly rejected by the Jewish religious officials of the day. The third thing, it gets worse from here, that he must be killed, and then after 3 days he was going to rise again. Well, maybe they heard the rise again. A lot of them probably didn't. Hey, Jesus, you kind of stopped me here at being killed. What's that all about? Never heard that about the Messiah. And not only that, Jesus didn't hint around. He didn't try to couch it in, comfortable language. Hey guys, I just want you to know it might not be the thing that you're thinking about. No, he was quite explicit. He spoke openly. He spoke plainly about this. And none other than Peter, the guy God speaks to, God slips to Peter's ears. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. And we kind of get this vision of, after taking Jesus aside, we kind of imagine Peter going, hey, you know, you, hey, Jesus, you got this all wrong. Well, look at the original Greek for rebuke. The original Greek for rebuke is to speak sharply, to almost to the point, and probably at the point of saying, shut up. You mean Peter said, Jesus, shut up? He very likely did. You go, oh my gosh, you can't say that to Jesus. Well, Peter did, apparently. It's basically, he's telling Jesus in the plainest terms possible, man, you got this all wrong. What are you doing? You're going to ruin everything. This is not, this is a bad plan. You need to go back and rethink this. And you can Mark kind of implies here, verse 33, that, they're having this sidebar conference, Jesus and Peter, while the disciples are looking on. Jesus turned and looked at his disciples. Well, he rebukes Peter. Hey, Peter, shut up yourself. Maybe not in those words, but pretty close to it. In fact, he probably says the next best thing. Get behind me, Satan. Man, poor Peter. He goes from 30 seconds, from 5 minutes, he goes from God's appointed spokesman to the tool of Satan. Zoom. If you tried to follow that, you might get a nosebleed. Poor Peter. Now, was he really had he turned Satanist here? No. Peter, I'm sure everybody would agree, Peter meant well. Good old Peter, just trying to look out for Jesus here. Hey, Jesus, you're scaring everybody here. You got to come up with a better plan, better solution here. And on and on and on. His intentions were good, but those good intentions were being used by Satan. Remember one of the temptations from Satan to Jesus in the wilderness. Hey, Jesus, what are you doing? You really want to go through this dying on the cross and crucifixion thing? Ugh, that's awful. Hey, I got a solution here. No muss, no fuss, no pain. I got all the kingdoms here. You can have them. They're yours. If only you fall down and worship me. It's a great deal. Why pass it up? And of course, Jesus turned down that temptation there. It's you can kind of see where it's Satan is coming back with that offer through Peter. Yep, it happens. That's why Jesus very likely said, "Get behind me, Satan." He was, it was a rebuke to Peter, but it was also a rebuke to Satan. Jesus is saying, "Nope, I'm not having any of it. I know what I'm here for. I know what I have to do, and I'm going to do it." And he adds, "You don't have in mind the things of God, but merely the things of men." Peter, you're coming at this the wrong way. I appreciate your intentions, I appreciate your feelings, but you're not, God didn't speak to you about this aspect. That God didn't speak to you about what you just said. This is the plan, whether you like it or not. It's it's amazing, but probably one of the formulas that we need to keep in mind that a sincere heart combined with man's thinking and man's priorities can lead to spiritual disaster if you're not careful. That's why you need any kind of issue you need to take to the Lord in prayer. God, is this what you want me to do? Because you know how many things how there's you hear the phrase the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So many things that end badly start with good intentions, and they just they lose the guardrails. They fall off the cliff, whatever. When we're not careful. Hmm. 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 Yes. Hmm. Yes. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, for most of these disciples, they didn't get it. They didn't get that spiritual insight until the day of Pentecost, until they received the Holy Spirit. Um, and this is it's again, this is more than I can understand or imagine or whatever. But Jesus is not finished yet. Verse 34, he called the crowd to him along with his disciples. For what? in, in just a very few verses and a very few set of words are five very profound and very perplexing statements. Here's the first one. And this extends the discussion we've been having now about, hey, this is who I am, and this is what's going to happen to me about the Messiah. And full disclosure, this is what you're in for if you want to follow, if you want to be one of my disciples. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple must do these three things. They must deny themselves, and they need to take up their cross, and they need to follow me. Deny themselves. Well, we all know who number one is in a lot of our lives. We kind of think about, hey, what am I going to do today? Um, but it's possible to indulge in self-denial, and sometimes we do it sporadically. I need to lose 20 pounds. Well, I'll skip dessert for the next week. the kind of thing. Or it's we're having a little donation thing here. Yeah, I can throw in that $20 I was going to spend on it on myself. Yeah, we can all do self denial, but that self denial in and of itself really doesn't really means nothing. It's what you replace with self, or who you replace with self. Take up their cross, number two. So many of us have jewelry or wear jewelry, or we have we have the cross. We wear it. It's displayed on our Bibles. Sometimes you see it on a lot of churches. Looks so pretty. Back in first century times, everybody knew what the cross represented. It was not jewelry, it was not anything fashionable, it was horrible. The Romans did not invent crucifixion, they just perfected it. It was a totally tortuous, humiliating, painful way to die. And that's what it was all about. It's the equivalent of what today would be the electric chair. And we all know what the electric chair is for. I don't think anyone would really want to wear a little symbol of an electric chair for a bracelet. There's a good reason why Lazy Boy doesn't make reclining electric chairs. Because hey, you sit down in it. If it works, you're not getting back up, not on your own power. Not a really fashionable or fun thing. Everybody knew what the cross was. The cross. If you went to the cross, if you carried the cross, you died. When Jesus says you need to take up the cross, he's not talking about that irritating family member or friend whose behavior you have to put up with, or little things like that. He said this is death. This is death to self. And Jesus is not talking about, hey, if you really love me, you would go out and kill yourself. He's not saying that. But you got to give up. You know, we're talking about who's number one in your life. Who sits in that number one seat? Is it you or is it someone else? Can't be you if you want to follow me. And that's the third thing. Follow me. That's the full disclosure. Being a Christian is not designed to be a hobby or a habit or an indulgence. It is a way of life. One of my very, very favorite Bible professors one time talked about the phrase that we use, hey, whenever somebody, say, a soldier who dies in combat during war, or a dear friend or family member who rushes into a burning house and to save someone, and the one that they save survives, he or she dies for their actions. Well, they gave their lives for something or for someone, for a good cause. He says that's perfectly valid, but you want to know, giving your life for something isn't limited to those people. He says every day, every second, you are giving your life for something. What is it? Very good question. And with that, Jesus leads to a second question, which is a paradox. He says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. How does that work? Because we're all so careful about our lives. We don't want to, very few of us go out bungee jumping, or even better, jumping out of a plane without a parachute. No one would be so foolhardy to try to get killed. We all want to do the things that will keep us healthy and wealthy and wise for as long as possible. And that's totally understandable. But what Jesus is talking about is saving your life to the point where it is a totally self-centered. You're number one and you're back in that number one chair. You're back on the throne. Hey, I got news for you, Jesus is saying. Nothing lasts forever, including your physical life. It will come to an end one day, one way or another. And if you've lived your life in order to just basically have it be all about you, it's going to be in for a rude awakening. Unlike the people who open themselves up, who do follow Jesus, who follow his instructions, who follow who follow his will, and you know what? Yeah, they wind up making sacrifices here and there along the way, but you know what? They feel fulfilled. They have they have the kind of lives that the very self-centered people are searching for, and more often than not, never find. If you notice, these questions are not separate and unto themselves or unrelated. When you go back and look at them, each of these questions seem to build on one another. And so, in terms of the issue about saving your life and losing it and the so forth, Jesus raises a third question, which is rather rhetorical, but it's designed to make you think about, hey, what lies beyond this life that you know right now? What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If you think about it, yeah, we own a lot of stuff. Check my garage. Yeah. We really don't own it as much as we rent it, or we're caretakers for a certain time and then it gets turned over to somebody else. But Jesus is saying, let's just assume for the sake of argument that you wind up owning the whole world. What are you going to do with it? Because you're only on this earth for so long. And then what happens? What happens to you? Mhm. Oh my, yes, all these kingdoms. Yes, yes, yeah. Nothing. It's all a sham. If that's your buy-in, you've bought into the wrong thing. And then there's a fourth question, which is a warning. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, ouch. I like that term. It's a very poignant term. Yeah, I'm sure that particular time frame, there was plenty of adultery and sin, both physical and spiritual. But if you look at the word generation, another description of generation is basically the human race. In any period of time, you're going to find this kind of attitude. You're going to have, in any point in time, in any kind of society, you're going to have this this point where everybody will have an opportunity to decide whether they want to serve Jesus or not. And some will reject that. Maybe they'll do it loudly and physically and, get away from me. Others will kind of, yeah, I'm sort of there. I warm a pew at church, but that's about as far as it goes. But don't ask me about anything because I kind of get embarrassed. They wouldn't say I'm ashamed of Jesus, but that's basically what it boils down to. And Jesus says, hey, look, quid pro quo. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. I love how over the past few decades there's been oh, you know what? Jesus has returned. And he's come back. He's come back to earth. And in fact, he's in London and he has rented a cold water flat somewhere on the East End. Really? And nobody knows this yet. No, when Jesus returns, everybody will know it. It's one of those unavoidable episodes. Can't miss it. And then there's finally there's a final statement that tips us into chapter 9 because it is kind of related to what follows, but we're gonna read this first verse and then close. This last sentence is a promise. It's a preview of coming attractions. And he said to them, "Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power." What you talking about, Jesus? Well, we're fixing to find out. So, if you will, we're going to stop here. But our lesson for next week, we'll look at chapter 9. So, if you'll read chapter 9 ahead of time, we can be up to speed for what we want to talk about. Anyway, thanks to everybody for spending your time with us this morning. I hope you got something out of the lesson. I hope you have a great week, a great Thanksgiving, and Lord willing, we'll be back here next Sunday. Thanks so much.